So let me give you a little bit of background. So my background is investment banking, and when I worked in a dealing room, my mode of communication was quite aggressive, I would say. It was the nature of the beast. You can't survive in a dealing room if you're not aggressive. I then left banking and got into spas, and to put it mildly, the communication style needed to change. You can probably imagine that.
Yes.
But here's the problem, it didn't, because I didn't know how to communicate any other way. So although my intention was not to be aggressive or to make people nervous, that was the result. So people found my mode of communication something that was making them feel a little bit nervous being around me. So I started learning NLP, or Neuro-Linguistic Programming, to really understand how to improve my communication. Because NLP, for those of you that may not have heard of it, it's been around since the 70s, it's been around a long time, it's used by politicians, it's used by business leaders, it's very well entrenched at the higher levels of business. NLP is really about the structure of communication and about how you improve your ability to persuade. Because if you think about it, the result you get when you're in a business meeting, when you're talking to your boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, whoever it is, the result you get is a function of how you communicate. You don't get the result you want, you communicated badly. Bottom line. Okay? So you have to take responsibility for it. Basically say, I didn't get the result. I can't just turn around and say, that person's a jerk. I've got to accept responsibility because my communication wasn't good. So that's a very sort of top level introduction to why I got involved in this area. What I'm going to talk about now is not NLP. It's based on the research of a guy called Dr. Robert Cialdini. Anybody here heard of Cialdini? One, two people. That's good. So I'm just going to actually put my watch here because I've only got 20 minutes, which is not a lot to talk about a subject that I normally spend a couple of days talking about. So I'm going to just give you a very high-level introduction to what this is. So Cialdini is the sort of Mick Jagger of persuasion psychology, if such a thing existed, okay? He is a celebrity in this area. He wrote a book back in the early 90s called Influence, The Power of Persuasion. And this book's been printed in 19, 20 languages. It's been on the bestseller list. If you haven't read it, I suggest you go and get it after this if you find the next 20 minutes interesting. It'll give you a lot of insight. And over his career, what he's uncovered is that the reasons why we say yes or no to a request, every one of us here, doesn't matter what your title is on your business card or your industry, every one of us have reasons why we say yes or no. And underlying those reasons are 6 fundamental principles of persuasion. You're all using them already. The thing is, you're not aware of how you're using them. So the first step here is to start getting awareness of how these principles impact our decision making, so that we can, number one, make decisions for the right reason, and number two, be aware of when other people are trying to do this to us. And then, by extension, we can use this with our clients so that we can improve our business chances ethically. I say ethically because I never suggest you use these techniques to get win-lose scenarios. I convince you to buy from me using my skills. Afterwards, you turn around and say, that's not what you said. That doesn't benefit any of us. So we use these to influence people in the way that they understand our message and afterwards say thank you for doing business with me. I'd like to do more business with you. So it's all about long-term win-win scenarios. Now let me just ask you a question. Is anybody here, yourselves included, ever bought anything and afterwards thought, why did I buy that? We've all been there, okay? I'll give you an example. I had to buy one of these roller things, you know, for the carry-on on the plane. So I went up to Tung Chung, to the City Gate outlet, and I went to Victorinox, and I saw this nice piece, and it was sort of 2,500 Hong Kong dollars. I thought, great, that's very nice, I'll buy that one. And while the assistant was going away to find a new one that hadn't been opened, I'm just walking around, and I see a scarf. Now it's June in Hong Kong. I don't need a scarf, okay? But I see this scarf and it's well designed and it's pretty cool because it's got a bit for your hands and it's got a hood that comes out the middle. And I thought, isn't that cool? A scarf with a hood and gloves. I don't have to wear a jacket anymore. And I looked at the price and it was $800. And I thought, well, I'm spending $2,500. What's another 800, right? Yeah?
Yeah.
Wrong. It's $800 for a scarf I don't need. But because I was spending $2,500, I bought the scarf. Just, You know where we're going here, yeah?
Yeah.
This is psychology working against us. Because we've already bought one thing, we suddenly think the next thing's not expensive, when actually it was $800 I didn't need to spend. The only thing I can say here is, I did go through the psychology in my head, I knew what was happening, and I just thought, oh, sorry, I deserve this. I've worked hard, I deserve it anyway, so I bought it anyway. I've never used it since, I bought it 2 years ago. But I bought it, I felt good at the time. But I have to accept what was the underlying psychology was here. And this is what we're going to discuss now, one of these principles, and I'll come back to the story of the scarf and tell you why I made that decision. So these 6 underlying principles, they affect us whatever we're doing, in our business life, our social life, and our personal lives. These are things you can take back and you can use constructively with your relationships. So this is really about personal empowerment. It doesn't matter what you do. The thing I love about this course, and I teach this course probably more than any other course to my corporate clients, is that it doesn't matter what industry you're in. This applies to everybody. Every single person walking down the street can benefit from these techniques. So it's a great marketing pitch for me, because it means all of you can join my course, because 20 minutes isn't enough. But it's also true, because it will make a difference in your life. So what are the 6 principles? I'm going to go through what the 6 are, and then I'm going to discuss one of them, the first one, reciprocation, in a little bit more detail. So let's discuss what 6 are. The first one is reciprocation, basically meaning that if I give you something, you should give me something back. This concept exists in every single culture. Every language has words for people that do not give back. In English, it would be something like tight or stingy, or very unfairly Scottish. I'm Scottish, so it's not fair. Okay? But everybody has a word in their language, which shows that this exists pretty much across every single culture. We'll talk about reciprocation more, because that's the one I am going to spend a little bit of time on. The second is consistency. In society, we have a very strong need to be consistent with what we say and with what we do. If we are not consistent with what we say or what we do, people value us less. Has anybody here ever worked for a boss that kept changing their mind? Was it fun? Okay? If you've got a client who says, I'm going to buy, and they never buy, you lower the value of their word. Yeah? So this is very linked to our personal integrity. So consistency is something that's incredibly important in society. And once again, every language has words for people that are not consistent. You know, the favorite one in American elections is a flip-flopper. You know, they get a couple of students to go past the last 40 years of records about the candidate in an election, find something they said or did when they were a student, and then trying to apply to them as a 60-year-old man and say, this person isn't consistent with what they say. They're trying to use consistency to prove a point. The third one is consensus. So the principle of consensus states that we tend to look around at what other people are doing to judge what is the right path of action. We especially use this if we are uncertain, if we don't know. So if any of you, and I'm sure you all do this, are going into a meeting where the client doesn't know you or your company, consensus is a very, very important principle to import. People do it naturally. As I mentioned, as the introduction mentioned from Titania, I own a chain of spas in Hong Kong. I have a lot of people come and pitch their services to me. Last week I had a group come to try and sell a slimming technology to me. Okay, not to me personally, but to the spas. Don't need to lose too much. So what were they doing? They were telling me about their existing clients. You know, Marie France uses it, this group uses it, it's in 500 locations in America. That's consensus information, yes? And they're smart to do that, because I hadn't heard of them, so I want to know who else uses it. Had they sat down and strategized this based on Cialdini's principles? Probably not, yeah? They're just doing it because it's smart business sense. However, underlying all of these principles is a series of what we call activators and amplifiers. The activators and amplifiers, you need a day to go through. You can't do it in 20 minutes. Even if you buy the book, they're not in the book. You need to have studied with Cialdini, as I have, to know what these are. But when you start to break down the activators and amplifiers, you can start to just literally plug and play this into your business situations. It becomes very, very powerful if you want to increase your influencing strength. Liking is the fourth one. We prefer to say yes to the requests of people that we like, people that we know. This is obvious. You don't get to Friday and think, okay, I'm going to call somebody I absolutely hate and invite them for a drink. It doesn't happen. You hang out with people that you like. The same in business. So what is the science behind liking? How can we improve rapport? How can we get people to like us? The fifth one is authority. Very important in Asia. Because while authority is important in most cultures, not all cultures, there's some cultures which are actually quite anti-authoritarian. Anybody here either Dutch or Swedish? No, they're the two, yeah? A little bit? Dutch and Swedish are the two cultures that are the most anti-authoritarian out of everywhere. Interestingly enough, Russian is not. Russian actually really looks up to authority, as does to an extent the UK and the US, but most of all is Asia. You know, in China, Japan, authority is revered, and you really need to work out how you're positioning yourself in respect to the hierarchy of an organisation where you're going. And then the last one, probably the most primitive of all of them, is scarcity. We are suckers for scarcity. I'll just give you one really, really good example here. So, a year ago, I was deciding I wanted to book something nice for my wife and I figured we'll go to see Depeche Mode in Amsterdam. Okay, some of you who are closer to my age might remember Depeche Mode. So a long weekend in Amsterdam. So I call up the agent and I say, tell me what the deal is. And they say, well, you know, the tickets are €60 and blah, blah, blah. And I say, have you got any sort of VIP stuff? I want to do this well. Sure, yeah, the tickets are €600. And I think, wow, okay, flights, accommodation, 2 tickets are €600, starting to get expensive. And then she says these magic words, well, let me check if there's any available. What do you mean? I want those tickets. You know the feeling? You go to buy a pair of shoes, yeah, well, I like these ones. Let me see if there's any in your size. What do you mean? I want these. Yes? That's, in sales psychology, it's called the takeaway sale. Because what you're doing is you're introducing the concept of scarcity, the principle that that product or service may not be available. The minute you do that, people want it more. You have this heightening arousal, your heart ends up in your mouth, your blood pressure rises. Whenever you feel that, that's the psychology acting on you. You need to be smart with it. Scarcity is a very, very powerful one if you can bring that into your business. And once again, if you know the activators and the amplifiers, you can. But I'm 10 minutes in. Let me actually talk about it in a little bit more detail. So, anybody tell me the story behind the Trafalgar Square Christmas tree? Anybody from the UK here, apart from me?
It's from Norway.
Yeah, good. It is a gift from the city of Oslo, so Norway, every year since 1947 as a thank you for the help that Britain gave Norway during World War II. Now the point here is this rule has longevity. If you do a favour for somebody, they will remember it, or they should remember it. The people that don't are probably the ones you don't want to be building a relationship with, in all honesty. In very topical example, World Cup's going on at the moment. 12 years ago when the World Cup was in Asia, a good friend of mine, he offered me World Cup final ticket in Japan. Now I didn't take it, and the reason I didn't take it was even before I started learning about this, I thought, how do I repay that? Okay? I mean, I can't just take it for a round of golf or buying dinner. This is a World Cup final ticket, and I like football, so to me this is quite a significant deal. So I didn't take it. Here's the problem. Even though I didn't accept it, I still feel indebted, because he gave me the offer. That's how powerful reciprocation is, because there's this obligation to receive. Even though we don't actually take it, we have got to accept that we were given an offer. And if the person hit on something that was meaningful to you, that is something that could actually trigger a feeling that you have to repay in some way, or that you're indebted. However, you have to be careful. It could backfire as well. I'll give you an example of when I tried to do this and it backfired. So I met a guy at an event very like this. It was a British Chamber lunch event, and he was managing here in Hong Kong a large company doing security. So lots of, you know, security guards and all the rest of it, that sort of business. And he was a Westerner who had come in to be the MD for Asia, and in Hong Kong he was the only English-speaking person. The whole business, management right down to every single security guard was local. And he said, I'd really like to have some English-speaking people in the team. And I said, do you mean management or actually on the ground in security? And he said, people in security as well. I said, well, I can help you there. How's that? I said, well, I have 60 Nepalese therapists. Their husbands and their husbands' network are your target, because Nepalese do a lot of security. Now, I was offering him something, but here's the problem. He also knew that I was potentially interested in doing training. So I imported reciprocity too early in the relationship, and he basically got defensive, because he knew that if he accepted this, he'd almost be obliged to hire me to do training. And it backfired and I never got any business from it. So the point here is, when you are using these principles, you need to do it in parallel with the level of your relationship. If I just spent a little bit longer getting to know him and gone for a couple of hikes with him because he liked hiking, and then made that offer, I can pretty much guarantee I'd have got business out of him. I can guarantee it. But, you know, we learn from our mistakes. So, this rule, it states that we try to pay in kind what somebody else gives to us. It's very overpowering. Anybody here heard of Hare Krishna? Yeah? I mean, I studied in London, and very often if I was walking around Seoul, there'd be a bunch of like crazy people dressed in orange, clapping bells and singing Hare Krishna, and you sort of get out of the way. But they got smart. They would dress in, you know, normal attire, hang out in the city, or go down to the train stations, and they'd come up to people and say, "Here's a gift for you." They'd put a flower in your lapel. They say, "No, I don't want it. It's okay. No, it's a gift." And as they back off, they'd say, "Would you mind giving a donation?" You think, well, who would be so crazy as to fall for that? But they have a property portfolio valued at over 300 million sterling. You know, all these pound coins, all these 50 pences, they add up. People will often just give something to get that feeling of obligation off their shoulder. Psychologically, this is very powerful. Now, the key thing I'm going to spend the last 5 minutes on is a reciprocal concession. Okay, this is a very important concept. Let's imagine this scenario. You're walking down the street, you're walking down Queen's Road, and a young boy or girl, maybe they're 10, 12 years old, maybe they're sort of a Girl Guide or a Boy Scout, some sort of community thing. They come up to you and say, "Excuse me, ma'am, excuse me, sir. We're having a barbecue in our community centre on Saturday. Would you be able to come? The tickets are $100. Well, it's a good cause, but you've got other things to do. You don't know anybody at the community centre. So, would you agree it's quite easy to say no? Sorry, I can't make it." Yeah? Then they say, "Well, if you can't make that, how about $10 for these candies that all goes to a good cause?" Do you buy the candies? Right, unless you've got a Harris Stone, you buy the candies. Okay, now here's the thing. They never wanted you eating their sausages. They just wanted to sell them candies. Right? If they'd come up to you and said, "Would you like to buy some candies for $10? What's the chance you buy it? It's a lot less, isn't it? But what happens psychologically is the process of reciprocal concession. So, they offered the candy, they offered the barbecue tickets. You said no. They said, "Well, if you can't do that, how about this?" That's a concession. Yeah? If you can't do that, how about this? They made a step back. They made a concession. You then reciprocated the concession. You didn't think about it, you just did it. It's a psychological process. Nice people reciprocate. Yeah? So that's the process of reciprocal concession. Now here's another example, which absolutely, every time I read it, I still laugh at it because it's so extreme. Imagine you're walking down the street and somebody comes up to you and asks you this, okay? Would you be able to chaperone some juvenile detention centre inmate to the zoo for a day? It says only 17%. Clearly that wasn't done in Hong Kong, because 17% is a pretty high number. Yeah? Hong Kong would be lucky to get 1%, I think. Now, imagine this is the first question. Would you be able to pay an unpaid counsellor 2 hours per week for the next 2 years? That's a crazy request. Nobody agreed. But here's the point, they never expect you to agree. Because what they've done here, this is a very common negotiation tactic, it's used all the time, especially in politics. They've gone so far out that your reaction is, how could I possibly do that? And then they say, well, if you can't do that, how about a day trip to the zoo? 50% say yes. Now this should scare you, okay? Because this is simply focusing on what the first question is, to create a perception that allows you to answer yes to the second question. And this is what multinationals pay smart marketing people millions of dollars to do to get you to buy their products and services. Okay? Now, there is a business takeaway here. This is the last slide, just to give you a business takeaway. And I've gone through this at breakneck speed, but that's because I've only got 20 minutes, so I apologise. Okay? You do need, obviously, a lot more time to really digest this. When you are in a business meeting, you must accept you may get a no. Okay, unfortunately, we don't always get the yeses. However, that doesn't mean you just walk away with your tails between your legs and say, "Thank you very much for your time." If you do that, what you're doing is you're retreating from the moment. What you do is you stay in the moment. You retreat in the moment, and you should always have an acceptable fallback position. Okay? An acceptable fallback position. So you should always go into influence situations with at least one ethical and acceptable fallback position. So if they say no to the $100 for the barbecue, they can say yes to the $10.